You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and it is that time again. We are making predictions this time around for week number 17 of the NFL. Already had 3 games go on behind us between Christmas and a 6-3 Thursday night banger, if you would like to call it that. But just a reminder to you all. As I make these predictions, I'm just a guy that likes making picks and having a good time talking some football with you all. I do not take this extremely seriously. I pick games straight up, and it's been going pretty well. That being said, I also need to add that because of the holidays right now, time is super short for me, and I'll be honest, I did not have as much time as I'd like to put these predictions together here, so if they feel even slightly shortchanged a bit, I apologize ahead of time. I am working with like a very limited amount of time right now, as I'm sure you all can understand with everything you've got going on as well, so just bear with me as I go through these predictions here. If it feels a little bit faster and a little less detailed, that is the reason why. But comment down below, let me hear your thoughts on this weekend's games. Who do you like? Who do you dislike? Fire away. I'd love to hear from you all. We got 3 games on Saturday. First one of the 3, we are looking at the Los Angeles Chargers going into New England to take on the Patriots. The Patriots right now are in a spot where they honestly have no real business winning football games. They are in a prime position for them to get themselves a really good draft pick and the opportunity to bring in some talent in this year's draft, and on a roster that really needs it, all things considered. Though, with that, I am a little bit worried about the Chargers traveling and just the weather that we're going to have in this game here. About 44 degrees or so is what it's looking like at kickoff. 50% chance of rain as well. It's going to be an ugly contest. The Chargers are coming, an indoor team from some nice weather, going into not so great weather here in New England. I do think that could add a bit of a wrinkle to this game and maybe make it a little bit closer than it should be for the Patriots side of things. I will say, though, that both teams have at least something worth losing here. The Patriots, though, it comes with winning the football game because you end up losing out on a really good draft pick should you come away with a win here if you're the Patriots. And on the flip side, the Chargers, well, if they don't win this football game, their playoff odds get very complicated. So you're going into a 3-12 team's home field. You need to be coming away with a win here if you want to make sure you keep those playoff hopes intact and nice and safe. I'm not quite honestly sure if there's really any position group that I would take from the Patriots over the Chargers. The more I think about it, the less certain I even feel about that. So I at this point, it's one team is better than the other in my eyes. It's just that, again, that travel and the weather that really has me concerned. The Chargers had 100 yards rushing last week for the first time since losing J.K. Dobbins, between Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal, averaging nearly 5 yards per attempt. So maybe it seemed, they could be figuring something out, which would honestly be really good because this Chargers team losing J.K. Dobbins feels like the balance of the offense kind of got blown out, and they've been needing to get it back together for me to really feel good about them going into the playoffs. So going up against the Patriots run defense that has been pretty soft this season, in the words of their own coach, not mine, his, allowing about 130 yards per game on the ground. Something tells me, especially with the rain there, look for the Chargers to ground and pound and really test that run defense over there in New England. Don't be surprised if Justin Herbert's maybe taken off with his legs as well, as we have seen him do quite a bit this season. I like the Chargers in this one here. They should be getting the win. I expect with the way weather's going to look that maybe the game gets a little bit lower scoring and the Chargers get the W 20-13. The next one we'll look at all the way in LA, as we were just discussing an LA team, but now we're talking the Cardinals going into LA to take on the Rams. Playoff hopes on the line for the Rams here. Winning this division is key for them getting in. Can Arizona play spoiler for this game here? First time these two teams met, Arizona throttled LA 41-10, was not even close. The Rams were, crazy enough, only in week 2, decimated by injuries across the board going into and even during the game as well. Cooper Kupp went down. Puka Nacua wasn't playing for them as he had been hurt the week prior. He had injuries along the offensive line, so the Rams were in a much different place, whereas right now they're actually looking really healthy. Everyone's back, and it feels like they're starting to fire on all cylinders right now, and they just went into New York, took down the Jets. Obviously, not too much you want to pipe off about, but a good travel, go get the win, and come back, and now you host a division rival to potentially lock up your division altogether here. Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua will obviously be putting Arizona's secondary to the test this time around, and Kyren Williams, who was shut down in week number 2, he's obviously been really benefiting from the fact that the passing game is alive and well now, so definitely need to keep an eye on him. I am very curious to see how Marvin Harrison Jr. does in this game because he had a monster performance in that matchup. 4 receptions, 130 yards, and a couple of touchdowns in that game. Big night for the rookie there, so locking him up is definitely going to be a big concern for the Rams here. And then the health of James Conner is another thing to keep an eye on here. Left the game last week, was not able to return, and the first time around these two teams played, 21 carries, 122 yards, touchdown on the ground. He had himself a really good night. Big reason why that offense was rolling the way they were in that first matchup. So this is a really good one here. I think both teams match up with each other really well, and the Rams by no means are a perfect playoff team at this current point, sitting at 9-6. I trust the coaching in Sean McVay a little bit more. I also trust Matthew Stafford more than I do Kyler Murray, as we've seen some tough spots from Kyler, especially during these last few weeks of the season here. So I think between coaching, quarterback, the teams overall, I like the Rams a little bit more here. Both teams actually match up really well as far as discipline is concerned as well. Both teams tied for first in penalties committed this season. So I'm between me liking LA a little bit more. No real disciplinary concern between either one of the two teams being so evenly matched. Coaching, I favor as well over in LA. I'm going to take the Rams here. I think they get the job done, but I do expect that the Cardinals take them to the finish line. I don't think they're going to make it easy. I think they're going to go down swinging, trying to play spoiler here, and they get the job done 28-27. The next one and final matchup of Saturday, I guess Saturday Night Football is what we're going to call this one here. The Denver Broncos going into Cincinnati to take on the Bengals here. Big playoff implications for this one in the AFC as the Broncos, sitting at the number 7 seed, look to try and hold off the Cincinnati Bengals. Bengals need a lot to go their way, and it starts with this game here. They have got to get the job done against Denver to be able to drop them to 9-7. It would put them at 8-8, and then they got to cross their fingers that the Chiefs want to knock out a division rival from the playoffs next week, and the Bengals could be in here. That being said, we look at the way Bo Nix played last week on the road in LA, very conservative, averaging about 3.3 yards per attempt. He was not really willing to push the ball down the field, and I'm really curious as to what went on with that because we've seen Bo Nix and we've seen a willingness from him to pushing the football down the field in certain games, but he has at other points, been more than willing to take his check down or just, hand the ball off to his playmakers and let them do their thing with their legs. This is a game where you're going up against Cincinnati, who is arguably one of the top scoring offenses in the NFL, both just in terms of opinion and statistically speaking, averaging 28 points per game. Led by Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase's unbelievable connection this season. Jamar Chase is literally on pace for a triple crown right now, leading the league in receptions at 108, yards at 1,510, and 16 touchdowns to boot on top of that. All first place in the NFL, and then Joe Burrow, who's tied for touchdowns at 39 right now with Lamar, who has one game more played than him at this current point. 4,200 yards, he's in first there as well. A completion percentage hovering around 69%. They have got to be willing to test this defense there in Cincinnati because the offense of the Bengals has all the big playability in the world and then some. Patrick Surtain's going to have his hands busy with Chase, and I'm very curious to see how that matchup plays out because I do think it is going to be a key factor in whether or not the Denver Broncos can even get the job done in this game here because my concern realistically is just the Broncos' ability to keep pace with the Bengals if defense starts to go out the window and they're not able to contain T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, of course, Andre Yoshivash, and then Mike Gesicki as well. There's a lot of firepower for this Bengals offense. So Riley Moss, Jaquan McMillan, Pat Surtain, as I just mentioned here, going to have their hands full in this one. And then Denver's pass rush is the other thing that I'm looking at with this game here. Only 4 sacks in their last couple of games compared to the 16 they had over the prior 4 before that. Feels like the pass rush maybe has just taken a little bit of a dip in production, and you want to see them get back to, that 3 or 4 sack per game average that they were working with prior. So want to see them get after the quarterback, make Joe Burrow uncomfortable. It really feels like slowing down what these receivers are doing, especially Chase, is one of those things where it's like it's a tall task and you're asking a lot from your corners. So getting to Joe Burrow quickly, throwing off his rhythm is probably what you want to do. And unfortunately for the Broncos, who do have no issues blitzing, they need to be careful because Joe Burrow has been kind of killing teams that are blitzing him this season. 13 touchdowns to 2 picks, 110, nearly 111 passer rating at 110.8. So Denver's got to get it done, but they've got to work with a 4-man rush because Joe Burrow has no fear of the blitz, and he's not afraid to throw into it and find his open man. As for who I think is going to win, I think this is going to be a tough one. It's going to be a grindy one, and it really comes down to Denver's defense and just what they're able to do. And going into Cincinnati after coming off of going into Los Angeles is tough. But I do like the fact that the Broncos at least had a longer week to prepare for this, and the travel is not nearly as bad as going from where they were to LA. And now this time around, they're just traveling after having a longer week to be able to go right up north, basically, to Cincinnati, northeast a little bit, I guess you could say, if I'm remembering my geography correctly here. I'm not as worried about this travel going into this game, so I think I'm going to take Denver. And I'm going to take Denver. I assume they're going to need to lock down the Bengals offense to be able to get this done here. I like the Broncos. I like them 24-23. Tight affair. I think they're going to really have to hang on to this one to get the job done. So give me Denver in a really tight win to lock up their playoff spot and get the job done. The next one we're looking at, and I really don't have a whole lot on this one here because the Giants, for what it's worth, as Indianapolis heads into the Meadowlands, just feel like they are locking in for that number 1 overall pick and controlling what the draft is going to have at the top. And at this point here, the Giants really, they have no reason to win other than, if the coaching staff and all of them want to try and make a point at the season's end here. But they're in pole position with the Raiders winning last week, and I feel like you have a lot more to lose than you do to gain with a victory here, whereas Indianapolis, for whatever the reason may be, despite the really tough situation they're in, have been deciding to just stay competitive, and they're trying to win football games. And listen, I respect that. I get it, but this is a team that I think could have benefited from a better draft pick this year just to add a little bit more talent before they try to figure out what they have in Anthony Richardson next season. We'll see how it plays out. Maybe that's just me being a pessimistic Colts fan. I don't know. But Anthony Richardson's been listed as questionable for this game. What Shane Steichen was saying, it makes it sound like there is a possibility despite the fact that he hasn't been practicing. And if he's not playing, it's obviously Joe Flacco going. And at this point, I thought Flacco was going to be a better quarterback than what Anthony Richardson has been. But at this point, I don't really know. It seems like a mixed bag with what we've gotten from Joe Flacco in Indianapolis. So, I mean, the way I see it, if the Colts want to win this football game, run the ball. You're going up against a Giants defense that's allowing 143 yards per game, second most in the NFL, only to the Carolina Panthers, who are like 30 yards per game ahead of them, wildly enough. I mean, Jonathan Taylor looked phenomenal last week, 218 yards and 3 touchdowns. Felt like he was playing with a little bit of a point to prove after dropping the football right before crossing the goal line the week prior to the Denver Broncos. So lean on him with rain in the forecast as well. Potentially, it sounds like you do. And by potentially, like it seems like the rain is supposed to subside by kickoff. Maybe it's like still sprinkling by then. So regardless, field conditions probably going to be a little bit slicker because it's going to be raining throughout Saturday into that early morning and early afternoon on Sunday. So leaning into the ground attacks probably the way you're going to want to go. And again, that Giants defense, not holding anything against them, but they're not great against the run. And if you can mitigate the 50-50 aspect of what feels like Anthony Richardson's throwing ability, because he's literally crossed the 50% completion mark only 4 times this season as a passer, I think the Colts can get the job done. Lean in on Jonathan Taylor, and I have them winning. And I think that the Giants can maybe, keep it tight. We'll see. It depends on, the health of a few of their guys as well. But I think they can at least hang in there, and I like the Colts 23-19. Jets are heading into Buffalo to take on the Bills here. And the way I look at this football game, Buffalo needs a convincing win after what happened last week. Yes, you got the job done. You stormed back. You won the football game. 24 unanswered points was really good for you. But that was not the game that I think anyone was expecting from the Patriots or the Bills in that one. And for optics sake, I think you want to come in here and you want to let everyone know, yeah, we're not just sleepwalking into games against lesser opponents, because that's kind of what it felt like Buffalo did last week. So I want to see them come in, and I want to see them put the hurt on the New York Jets. And I know it's a division rival. Those games can always be a little bit tighter, but I want to see them come in and show everybody why they are 12-3 and why they should be considered amongst the best in the NFL right now as the number 2 seed in the AFC. Weather looks like it's going to be around like mid-50s or so, 98% chance of rain at the moment here, so it could be ugly, could be sloppy. That means just get James Cook going on the ground here. He should be the early focus right out of the gate. The Jets are allowing about 121 yards per game on the ground, and Josh Allen's apparently dealing with both a right elbow and right shoulder injury at the same time. And this was said on the broadcast, like a fracture. Was it fractured or broken? I can't remember what they said, but something going on with his left hand. So I'm assuming you want to just get the ground game going and run the football down their throats here. Keep an eye on Buffalo's pass rush as well, because Greg Rousseau has been on pace for a career season. He's already broken his career best in pressures already, and he's well on his way to breaking sacks as well with a couple of games to go, sitting at 7.5. So he, AJ Epinesa, and Von Miller should be getting after an offensive line that's been a little bit banged up and just in kind of a tougher way over there in New York. And Aaron Rodgers, for what it's worth, has not been he's been fine under pressure, but when the pressure really gets going, we have seen him brought down enough that it can kind of throw off his connection. And it sounds like Devontae Adams is going to be good to go. They've been getting it going over the last 4 games, 30 receptions, 441 yards, and 5 touchdowns from Aaron Rodgers to Devontae Adams. So if you can kind of throw off that rhythm there, get after Aaron Rodgers, I think that is a good opportunity there to slow down what the Jets are doing and finding success with as of late. And then on top of that, I mean, the Jets also, injury concerns, Sauce Gardner, Morgan Moses, Elijah Vera Tucker, all did not participate Wednesday and Thursday in practice. I have not seen what the Jets have done on Friday, so as of this recording, I don't know what's going on there. But I will say that I am fading the Jets on this one. I really like Buffalo. I think they're going to come out with kind of a point to prove. Division game, I think Jets can maybe keep it a little bit closer, but I have the Bills 27-17. Next one's an AFC South clash, and this is one where it's a crapshoot, and you really just kind of have to go with who you think is the better of the two worst teams two of the worst teams in the NFL right now. And the way I see it is, you can kind of look at this as like which team wants it more, and I'm not really talking about the win. I'm talking more so about a higher draft pick than anything else. Brian Callahan obviously needs a franchise quarterback, so them losing this football game would obviously help benefit them, whereas Doug Peterson, in my opinion, needs to keep winning if he can to secure his job, which is something that I'm in a weird place about, because it felt like there was a really loud noise going on surrounding his job security middle of the season, and if the Jaguars had lost to the Patriots in London, all hell would have broke loose and he probably would have been left on the tarmac and not be allowed to fly back with the team kind of deal. But I feel like I'm not really hearing anything about that anymore, and so I'm curious, is his job going to be safe, or are the Cons just kind of all right, listen, tough season, maybe we try to run it back just one more time when everyone's healthy? But that's kind of what we did this year already, so I don't understand why Jacksonville would want to do it again. So I'm just really curious what's going on right there. I don't know if that's just me, but I'm a little bit confused about how quiet it seems to have gotten, and maybe it's just because I'm not keyed in on Jacksonville fandom specifically. Jacksonville fans, let me know if I'm off on that, but it just feels like it's gotten quiet around him. Jets game aside, though, the Jaguars offense has been relatively flat for 4 of their last 6 games here, and compounded now by the fact that the Jaguars are going to be without left tackle Walker Little this week. I just cannot really put a ton of stock in what Mac Jones does as a quarterback. I've seen him plenty while he was in New England, working where I do, and then on top of that now, as I'm loosely interested in what he's doing over in Jacksonville, it has not looked much better either, so I am worried about the offense right now. And Tennessee on the other side, I mean, they've been juggling quarterbacks all season long, whether it's been because of injuries and or because of benchings. So, I mean, you don't really know necessarily what you're going to get from this offense and who the quarterback is of that week. Tennessee last week, if you saw what they did, fell 38-7 and stormed back late, losing 38-30, but Indianapolis just kind of took their foot off the gas completely, put it in park, and just hoped to God they didn't catch them until the very end of the game, and they lucked out because they didn't. They ran out of time, basically. But at this point here, it's a crapshoot. It really is. I mean, both of the defenses have struggled. I would say Jacksonville maybe a little bit more than Tennessee. Tennessee's actually been pretty competitive on defense. It's a lot of the while they're sitting there like allowing roughly the same points per game, and actually Tennessee's allowing a little bit more. You have Tennessee, who's allowed 44 touchdowns to Jacksonville's 45, and Jacksonville's allowing about almost a football field more worth of yardage per game. And Tennessee's been kind of the victim of some back-breaking Will Levis turnovers that have either led to points and or have put teams in like 15 yards or less field position, it feels like, multiple times this season. So I think I like Tennessee's defense a little bit more, so I'm going to go Tennessee. I think they win 23-20. I feel like this game could be it's AFC South. The better team typically plays down to the lesser team, but who is the lesser team in this situation? I don't really know. They're both sitting at 3-12 right now, both in prime position to have a top 5 pick in the draft. So whichever one of these teams wants a better pick will find their way to a loss. And I feel like the Titans, for what it's worth, are really, especially with the way Brian Callahan's been talking as of late in interviews, I feel like they're more inclined to win this football game. So I guess I'll take Tennessee 23-20. The next one's another one of those crapshoot games here, unfortunately. The Raiders and Saints, both of these teams literally have no real benefit to winning the football games. Darren Rizzi clearly wants to prove that he is head coaching material based off of comments that he's been making here. Meanwhile, on the flip side, Antonio Pierce has made it abundantly clear that this team is not settling for losses and they are fighting to the very end. And I've got to respect that from both sides, the Raiders especially, because they were a team that was sitting with a prime opportunity to have the number 1 pick. And winning last week against Jacksonville basically blew that opportunity out of the water, because I think they went from like 1st to 6th in the draft order, which is tough because you're kicking yourself out of a top 5 pick with that W. That being said, the way these two teams match up here, I mean, you look at the Saints and just how injured they are, and Darren Rizzi even announced, Eric McCoy, the center, is done for the season after getting back, and he had missed a decent amount of the season with a groin injury. He's out after getting hurt against Green Bay, and he's probably done for the season. Lucas Patrick is done for the year. Alvin Kamara did not participate in practice both Wednesday and Thursday. Again, at this moment, I don't know what's happened with Friday's practices just because of time and whatnot, and when I'm recording this versus when it actually goes out. So there's a lot of injuries to be concerned about, but there is some positives because Chris Olave seems to be trending to possibly playing. Marquez Valdes-Scantling as well, so getting some receivers back in what is a extremely thin wide receiver room right now. It's really tough to kind of predict what the Saints could look like on a weekly basis because of the injuries they've dealt with. Meanwhile, on the flip side, the Raiders working with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback right now. You obviously have the rookie phenom in tight end Brock Bowers, who has been on an absolute tear this season. I mean, 101 receptions for 1,067 yards and 4 touchdowns. I mean, there were a lot of people who thought he was going to be good, and I was very interested in just how much of his talent from Georgia to the NFL was going to translate. I could have never envisioned it to be like this, but it has been phenomenal to watch. He and Jacoby Myers, honestly, as a tandem, working towards 2,000 yards as a duo, has been a sight to behold. All things considered with the quarterback situation over in Las Vegas as well. I'm really curious to see if the Saints have what it takes to be able to slow down those guys, because they've been playing really well, even despite the lack of not having a real running game going. So with a literal crapshoot type of game here, I'm not really sure who gets the job done, and this is me just taking my best educated guess. I think I'm going to go with the Raiders, and a lot of it just has to do with the amount of injuries and uncertainty surrounding the Saints. They could look pretty good if certain guys come back this week and do play, but also with guys that we know are not going to be active this week, it's really hard for me to pick them confidently, and I at least really respect what we're seeing from the fight in the Raiders right now. They clearly do not give, an F about losing and getting better picks, and I like that. So I'll take the Raiders, let them get another win. And I had people ask me last week, why would the Raiders be winning football games? They should be losing. Well, there they were last week, finding a way to win against the Jaguars, and I think they can do it again this week against the Saints. Next one is Carolina going into Tampa Bay to take on the Buccaneers. Last time these two teams met, Carolina took Tampa Bay to the absolute limit in overtime here. And Baker Mayfield, for what it's worth, is also 4-0 in his career against Carolina. So a little bit of a streak on the line in this one here. I think with Tampa Bay just going back to the well and doing what worked the first time around, run the football. As I mentioned earlier, the Carolina Panthers are the league's absolute worst run defense by about 30 yards. It's the Giants sitting at the, let me scroll through my notes here really quick just so I can find that number again. The Giants were sitting at about 143 yards per game allowed. And if I'm not mistaken, I forgot to write the number down. Shame on me here, but I believe the Panthers are allowing about 172 yards per game rushing right now, which is a wild gap to consider, going from first to second at about 30 yards per game. So with that, Bucky Irving and Rachaad White, the first time around these two teams played, averaged about 6.5 yards per attempt, racking up 228 yards as a duo. Go back to it. The biggest thing for Tampa Bay really is just Baker Mayfield needs to protect the football better. He had a couple of bad interceptions the first time these two teams matched up. So if he can just take care of the football, Tampa Bay had an opportunity to really run away with that football game, and those two mistakes ultimately kept it really close. So take care of the ball there. And on the flip side, looking at Carolina, coming off the heels of a really strong performance from Bryce Young, he does get the opportunity in facing Tampa Bay, who arguably gave him one of his best games, if not potentially his best game of the season. Completion percentage wasn't great, but he had nearly 300 yards passing and a touchdown, and that's no surprise given the struggles of Tampa Bay's pass defense, struggling basically all season long, allowing the second most yards per game through the air. So both of these teams come in pretty large injury reports altogether, like way too much to get into, so definitely check those out if you're interested in that. But both of them have very large injury reports at the current moment here, but Tampa Bay has more to play for. Whereas Carolina's in the position right now trying to win football games, to build morale and build something going into next season under new head coach Dave Canales. Tampa Bay has a playoff spot on the line, even if they did kind of screw themselves over losing last week. So Tampa Bay needs to get the job done. They need to get the win here, keep their playoff hopes alive, and cross their fingers that Atlanta can find their way to another loss. So they do have some more to play for. I like Tampa Bay. I do think Carolina, once again, is probably going to give them some issues, but I think the Buccaneers can get the job done here again, and I have them winning 28-21. This next one here, Dallas going into Philadelphia to take on the Eagles here. It's starting to sound extremely unlikely that we see Jalen Hurts playing in this football game based on comments made by Nick Sirianni today. So with that in mind, I am a little bit concerned about what happens with Philadelphia here. That being said, though, on the flip side of things, CeeDee Lamb is also done for the season in Dallas, and he has been a large reason as to why Cooper Rush has been able to look as good as he had. Cooper Rush and CeeDee Lamb had a legit quarterback to wide receiver connection, and I've got to say, I've been extremely impressed with what I've seen from Cooper Rush, not even just this season, but in the opportunities he's gotten to play. He's always kept the Cowboys offense afloat and working fairly well, despite people not really expecting a whole lot, because obviously Dak Prescott's their guy, but he's done a really good job coming in as a stopgap fill-in guy whenever Dak Prescott's missed time, and it makes sense why Cooper Rush has been their backup for however many years now. I mean, it feels like Cooper Rush is like de facto backup quarterback in Dallas. So tip my cap to what he's been doing there, but really tough loss now. And this is going to really test Cooper Rush and what he's been doing over the last, month or so, you could say, with that offense. One big matchup I really like for this one here, and one that I think is worth keeping an eye on, is going to be right tackle Lane Johnson and Micah Parsons, though. Parsons has 47 pressures and 8.5 sacks since returning in Week 10. That's crazy numbers. 8.5 sacks and 47 pressures in 10, the number's weird here, I think 8 games. I mean, a sack a game on top of that. I'm not going to divide 47 by 8. I'm not a mathematician here, but he leads the league in both pressures and sacks in that span, according to Next Gen Stats. So he has been on an absolute tear, and this is despite the fact that playoffs have been, have felt like out of the picture for quite some time, even though Dallas kind of on their win streak, or just that 4 of 5 games won that they had going on there, and people talking about maybe them sneaking into the playoffs if a lot of things broke their way, even coming into last week knowing that they were eliminated. He has been playing with his head on fire. Lane Johnson, though, obviously one of the best right tackles in the NFL, as good as they come, averaging a time to pressure of 3.95, which is best amongst all offensive linemen who have allowed at least 15 pressures or more. He has been great on the right side over there. This is going to be one of those matchups that are always worth watching because it's two of the best at their craft going head-to-head here, and always a fun battle to watch. And then the running backs. Keep an eye on both of them. Obviously, Saquon Barkley has been doing his thing. And at this point, it feels like there's a good chance that he winds up breaking Eric Dickerson's rushing record. Obviously done in 17 games and not 16. It is what it is. I feel like that's just semantics at this point. We all know that the NFL season has gotten longer and longer over periods of time. Like there was a time where I think it was only 12 games before it went to 14, and then it went to 16, and now here we are at 17. And someday soon it's going to be at 18. Someday they're going to have to work around the rule book to appease the people that are unhappy with, records not being asterisked with how many games it was done in. But at this point in time, Barkley's on an absolute tear, and it seems like he's going to break that rushing record. And I'm curious to see if he can do it against Dallas, because their run defense has not been perfect by any means. But on the other side, Rico Dowdle. How about Rico Dowdle? Had a strong 4-game stretch before running into Tampa Bay last week. I mean, racked up over 100 yards in 3 of those 4 games before hitting into Tampa Bay. So this is one of those things where losing CeeDee Lamb, we're, again, going to see just how effective now Rico Dowdle can be, because that's one less serious threat that the defense needs to key in on through the passing game. And if Cooper Rush is having a hard time finding other guys and distributing the football, maybe, we see the Eagles key in a little bit more on the run. Maybe we see Rico Dowdle get bottled up again this week. Definitely something to keep an eye on there. As for who I think is going to win, this one's really tough. It really is. This is probably one of the harder games to pick this week, because with Kenny Pickett being the quarterback, I really don't know. And I'm hoping that with a week of preparation as the quarterback, if he is going to be the guy that starts for them on Sunday, maybe he'll fare a little bit better. But he did not look great in last week's game, obviously coming in, filling in the middle of the game, or not even the middle of the game. It was like the second drive of the game. So I am a little bit concerned on that end, but losing CeeDee Lamb, because going into this here, if CeeDee Lamb was not hurt, I'd probably feel very good about taking the Cowboys and upsetting here. But I think, especially being in Philadelphia as well, I'm going to stay safe. I'll go Philadelphia. I have them winning 23-17. I think the defense maybe can hold Philadelphia down a little bit, maybe keep them from scoring too many points with Kenny Pickett under center. But ultimately, I think the Eagles should be able to get the job done. This next one, Miami going into Cleveland to take on the Browns. I really don't have a ton on this one here. This was one of those games that I was looking at, and I'm like, what is even the story of this matchup right now? It sounds like DTR is going to be the quarterback, and he should be good to go and starting for them on Sunday. There's obviously always the possibility that an underdog can get the job done in any given week, in any given game, in any given matchup. It does not matter. Any given Sunday is as real of a statement as they come in sports. And weather could have an impact on this one here as well. It looks like it's going to be close to 60, maybe a little bit under come kickoff time, but rain appears to be in the forecast as of this recording. So we'll keep an eye on that, and I think we'll look to leaning on the ground game for both of these teams here. I obviously trust Tua far more than I do DTR when it comes to passing the football, but depending on how bad the rain is could determine just how effective the passing attack is. And for what it's worth, you're lining up along opposite of Myles Garrett and company over there. Pass rush is pretty good. They're obviously going to need to try and disrupt what Tua does as one of the most, if not the most efficient quarterback in the NFL, because nobody gets the ball out faster than he does. But running the football, I think, is what's going to decide this one here. And Jerome Ford's been pretty good for Cleveland, especially the last couple of weeks, racking up about 176 yards and a couple of scores. Devon Achan's on the other side with Miami, and he had a 120-yard game last week, but no more than 41 yards in the 4 weeks prior to that. So definitely one of those things where leaning on the ground, especially if it really starts to rain and comes down, is probably going to be the best bet there. That being said, the way I see it, Miami still has a life, albeit a dim one, a dim one of hope when it comes to making it into the playoffs with needing to win out and also things breaking their way. So a team that's more motivated, a Browns team that I don't really know if I can count on Dorian Thompson-Robinson to not make a mistake or two, especially in the rain. Like, again, I like what Jerome Ford's been doing for Cleveland, but I think I'm fading Cleveland on this one here, and I like the Dolphins. They get the job done. I think it could be lower scoring, though. I expect the Browns defense to maybe hold Miami down a little bit, again, especially in the rain, but I like Miami 21-17. This next one here, I think a lot of people, especially in the NFC North, have been waiting to see, and that is going to be Green Bay going into Minnesota. Packers, Vikings, a rematch from week number 4, where the Packers coming up short And I've seen Packers fans talking about it. I've even brought it up myself a few times about the failed second half comeback attempt where Green Bay essentially just kind of ran out of time, racking up 22 unanswered points starting at the end of the second quarter, ultimately falling short 31-29 because ultimately they let a field goal happen during that second half. That was the only points they allowed in that second half was 3 points, and it was all Minnesota needed to hold off the comeback attempt by Green Bay. Packers, Quay Walker, Christian Watson, and Elton Jenkins have all missed practice this week. Guys you need to keep an eye on because depending on whether or not a combination of them play or if, in some awful reality, none of them play, that could be problematic for Green Bay here. So it looks like safety Javon Bullard could potentially be playing this week and returning as well. It sounds like some positive things are being said about him around the team. And then the Vikings, for the most part, health-wise, they're looking all right. They're about as in good of shape as you could be at this point in the season right now. Injury report is extremely short. There's really not a whole lot going wrong for them in that front. Both these QBs are on fire. They've been playing out of their minds right now. Sam Darnold's literally having a career year, 32 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, the most passing yards he's ever thrown for. Like, Sam Darnold is, bar none, having himself a career season. And then Jordan Love on the flip side, he had a period, I think, from the first 7 weeks of the season, 8 weeks of the season, where he could not avoid throwing an interception. Whether it was a tip or whether it was just a bad pass, he could not avoid it. But then, week 11, from then on, not a single interception. He's been dealing. The run game's looked really good. You've got two really good offenses going head-to-head here. Great wide receiver rooms between both the Vikings with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. And on the flip side, the Packers. Maybe not quite the star power and high-tier level of Justin Jefferson, but you have Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Ontavian Wicks, and hopefully if Christian Watson can go, a Christian Watson as well. 4 really capable pass catchers that have helped you spread the ball around. Of course, Tucker Kraft, the tight end as well. And then on the flip side, you of course have TJ Hawkinson as well from Minnesota. This is a game that is going to dictate a lot of what happens in the NFC here, because if the Vikings lose, it's going to ultimately hurt their chances of locking up that number 1 seed. And then, of course, for the Packers, for them getting a win over Minnesota, especially after falling just short the way you did, burying some of those early season demons would go a long way in this team's confidence as they get set to march through January and through the NFL playoffs. So much on the line in this game. And it's interesting to see what people are saying about this game. It's interesting to look at, and again, not a betting channel, but it's interesting to look at the betting lines and see where everything stands on all of that. All season, I have been just in disbelief is probably the best way to put it when it comes to Minnesota and what they have been doing this year. Every single week, it feels like they win another football game. I look at their record and I go, wow, I can't believe Minnesota is, this and two. I've been saying it for weeks. And they are such a good football team, from Brian Flores and what he's doing on the defensive side and their just willingness to send the house and disrupt what quarterbacks are doing. They are one of the most disruptive defenses in the NFL. It's unbelievable watching what they are doing and what Kevin O'Connell has done for Sam Darnold's career, where the conversation is now, do the Vikings pay him? Does he go somewhere else? How much are you willing to pay somebody like Sam Darnold, who clearly in the right system can thrive because he has all the tools necessary? Like, this is someone that was the butt end of a mononucleosis meme for basically all of his career. That's what I remember, is this the picture of him smiling, looking at the camera, and it's just mononucleosis underneath. It's one of the more crazy things that I've seen. And of course, again, Justin Jefferson and what Jordan Addison have been doing at a 1-2 punch. Minnesota is a wagon. But the Packers also defensively seem like they're starting to figure it out. They can run the football. Jordan Love has cleaned it up and he's not making mistakes. How do you pick one of these two teams? I really don't know, but I'm going to go out on a limb on this one here. Buck stops at Green Bay. Give me the Packers 30-28. They get to right the wrong of the loss they had earlier in the season, and I think this time around it's Green Bay scoring in the final seconds, not to come up just short, but to come up with a victory nonetheless. Give me the Packers. I think this is going to be a phenomenal game. It might be the game of the weekend, and it's going to be full of fireworks, especially in Minnesota. No elements to worry about. Minnesota crowd's going to be wild. It's going to be a tough one, but I think Green Bay can get the job done. This next one, we have Atlanta going into Washington to take on the Commanders. And Atlanta, their pass rush has found success in the last month. This is a team who is dead last when it comes to sacks, pressures, you name it. If it has to do with and after the quarterback, they're probably dead last in the stat. But they have closed the gap significantly. But with that comes the responsibility now this week of being able to bring that same pressure, but not losing contain of Jaden Daniels. Washington, for what it's worth, has allowed 20 sacks in their last 6 games, but only 1 against Philadelphia. That's a pretty good defensive front that they have over there, so a phenomenal job on their part last week. But this Atlanta Falcons team, and again, their newly found success going after the quarterback, they cannot make that mistake of being too aggressive and getting behind Jaden Daniels, because he will make you pay, and we have seen that all season long. Michael Penix is on the other side, obviously at quarterback. This will be his second start against a defensive-minded head coach in Dan Quinn, someone who's done some really good stuff with defenses over his tenure as a coach in the NFL, whether he's a head coach or DC. But keeping a steady run game, I think, will be key for the Falcons here. Bijan had 94 yards and a couple of touchdowns last week. Something along those lines. Obviously, 2 touchdowns is a lot to ask for, but just keeping a steady run game behind Michael Penix. Don't put too much pressure on him, especially going up against a fellow draft mate and somebody who's had the entire season to play as opposed to just a game now under his belt in Michael Penix. I think if you can just steady the rock, pound it on the ground, you put yourself in a good position, limit the mistakes that could potentially be made by Michael Penix. Be very interested to see how that works itself out. Looks like Drake London should be good to go. He's been saying he's going to play as well, which is a nice sigh of relief for the Atlanta Falcons, because there was concern about his availability coming out of last week's game. And then both these teams obviously have plenty to play for. So this is another one of those games that you look at it and maybe you go, if you're not like a Commanders Falcons fans, you go, ugh. But then you look at it, you go, okay, well, wait a second. Commanders are 10-5. Falcons are 8-7, leading their division. Playoff hopes are on the line. This could be the number 4 seed in the NFC if they just win out. There's a lot on the line in this game here, because the Commanders, as the number 7 seed at 10-5, if they drop this game here, the pressure is really on to make sure you secure a win next week. Because if they drop this final 2 and some of the teams behind them win out and get their way to 10-7, they could wind up missing the playoffs. Nothing is secured for Washington right now. So they've got to find wins, and they need to find it starting this week against Atlanta. And again, Atlanta needs to win if they want to hold on to this division here, because the Bucs are hot on their trail trying to make up for the loss that they just took was it last week before, whenever it was. Both teams riding win streaks. Lot on the line here, but I think I'm going to go Washington. Give me the Commanders 28-20. I think just the big thing right now for me is that, yes, it's 2 rookie quarterbacks going head-to-head, but you have Jaden Daniels, who has an entire season essentially at this point under his belt, and I think that experience can pay off, whereas Michael Penix is still trying to feel his way through the waters of a fresh start in the NFL, only in game number 2, and I could see Dan Quinn putting together a really good defensive game plan to maybe give him a headache, and might be kind of like his welcome to the NFL against this defense kind of moment. Give me the Commanders, though, again, 28-20. And then finally, to wrap up the week, Detroit going into San Francisco to take on the 49ers. The 49ers offense has simply flatlined, and at this point has reached the point where you can't really trust them to win you a football game when things get tight. And that's not me just trashing on San Francisco for the sake of doing it. It's for fair reason. You look at the losses, Brandon Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, Trent Williams, the big 3 that they've lost on offense. 2 of those guys, at the very least, amongst the best in their position. Trent Williams, I would argue, has been the best left tackle in the NFL for like 10 years now. And Christian McCaffrey, when he's healthy, arguably the best. If not, he's somewhere within 1, 2, and 3 of the best running backs in the NFL. It's been tough. And then on top of that, the running back room has just been slaughtered with injuries from number 1 on the depth chart down to number 4, essentially. So it's been a tough going for San Francisco. And because of all of that, the losses, just the rotation of guys that have been coming through because of these injuries, it feels like Brock Purdy's play has regressed a bit. He's suffering from that, and it almost feels like he's trying to make too much happen now because of it. And again, I'm not throwing blame on him or shade on him. This just feels like the reality of kind of what's going on in San Francisco right now. We've even seen, several late game interceptions where they're game losing interceptions. And it's been tough going for the offense over there in San Fran. And then on the flip side of things, you have a team like Detroit, who the defensive injuries have piled up. Don't get me wrong. And they came out of last week, no defensive injuries. 2 wins in 1 week. Not bad if you ask me, considering the state of Detroit's defense. That being said, despite losing David Montgomery last week against Chicago, in Chicago, did not skip a beat. Offense continued to find its way into the end zone, continued to move. Gibbs went over 100 yards. Jared Goff continues to look as good as he has all season long. I mean, this is one of those things where, you know, you wonder, is this like maybe a trap game or something like that for Detroit? But it doesn't feel like Detroit falls into trap games. And, I mean, they're a team that they have a loss to Tampa Bay, who is flirting with being a playoff team. And then they also have a loss against the Bills team that, for what it's worth, it was a very motivated Bills team coming off the loss to the Rams, and they're a very good team, number 2 seed in the AFC. This is a team that doesn't stumble, doesn't slip up. And while maybe you could find some success from San Francisco against, again, a battered defense, this will be a good test for San Fran and where this offense is right now. And if guys, you know, if anyone can play this week that hasn't been playing, maybe that works out for them. But the way I see it, this is a Detroit Lions victory. They should be getting the job done. They should be pulling off the win in this game here. I like the Lions somewhere along the lines of 30-20. I think San Francisco can find points just because, again, so many injuries from Detroit's end. We watched the game last week against Chicago, 34-17. If the Bears can put up 17 points against the Lions, I would assume San Francisco, who is in a little bit of a better spot than Chicago, and it doesn't take a lot to be, but they are, for what it's worth. I would say that they should at least be able to put up 20 on the Lions defense here. So give me the Lions. Good win here. I would say that the 49ers defense is a little bit better than Chicago's from last week as well. So drop down the point total a little bit, up what their opponents did, but the Lions should still be getting the job done here in this matchup. Again, 30-20 for the win, wrapping up week number 17 and setting us up for one final week of NFL football. But those are my predictions going into week number, or whatever's remaining, I guess, of week number 17. Fire away in the comment section down below. Let me hear from you all, your thoughts, your opinions. As always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.